Safe and sound at home again. Let the waters roar, Jack. Safe and sound at home again. Let the waters roar, Jack. Long we've tossed on the rolling main. Now we're safe ashore, Jack. Don't forget your old shipmate. Folly, rolly, 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 ride-o.
Well, everybody, I feel like I'm hosting the Citizen of the Year. I'm having a flashback. So we just have a few gentlemen in here. Would you like to introduce yourself?
John Dwyer from Cohasset.
Oh, hey, John. Nice to meet you. Yeah. I was just going to say, because it's mostly us gals, we're from the era, like we're burning our face masks the way we used to burn our bras. We are done. The face masks are history, as far as I'm concerned. Plus, they do a terrible job on lipstick. And the lipstick industry plummeted. It was just a terrible thing. I had to dig mine out. But anyway, thank you so much for coming. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mary Ford, and I was the editor of the Cohasset Mariner for 28 years.
And wonderful, too.
My other child was the Hingham Journal, and that was another one I was editor of, and I loved it. And I can't believe how fast it went by looking back. I don't know if you remember Picture This, but it was always on page 2. We did everyone, including the police dog. We did an owl. We did Santa. We did Easter Bunny. We caught everyone in town, every lifeguard. It was just great fun, and it was very sort of homey and cute to do. So it was a wonderful career, but as we all know, the clock moves on, and suddenly you realize I'm working 40 to 60 hours a week. It's getting a little harder to climb those office stairs, so maybe it's time to find something else to do. So it was a very difficult decision because I loved my career, I loved all my people, I loved the government covering things, and I was just telling now Ethel here is one of my great Hingham columnists, wrote for me for many years, and I was telling her, I know the papers have dropped, I guess would be the best way to describe it, though I still have some great friends that work there, so I try not to be too critical, but I think that the best way I can describe it is you think of a salad and you think of putting it together so there's something in there that everybody likes. So you don't then try to say, well, where's the tomato? Or, you know, there's no cucumber, there's no onion, you left the dressing off. And I found that the secret to the papers and their success was to make sure there was something in there for everybody, whether it was the local columns. Some people hated the police log. I remember my first week in Hingham, Reverend Edson from the Episcopal Church came up to the office to tell me that police log should not be in the Hingham Journal. And then he invited me to speak before the Hingham Hall Religious Leaders Association, where I was totally trashed about having the police log in the paper. But I kept running it for the next 28 years. It didn't affect me at all because I knew it had an audience. And we were careful, we edited it, and but that was the secret. And I found that when I took vacations, which were rare, because in the newspaper industry, when you step away, someone else has to do their job and your job, and chances are they're not going to focus on your job as well. And so I come back, and I had my little cats that weren't every week in me shelter, and they'd leave the cat out. And of course, the first call I would get was, "Where's the cat?" And so I would say they would mess up my editorial pages. It was very hard because I'm not a perfectionist. I'm actually kind of a messy person. If you went to the Hingham office, you would see that. There was dust everywhere, paper stacked to the ceiling. But I had my own kind of organized chaos. In the papers, I was able to put everything in certain spaces. And where it was in the paper was just as important as being in the paper. So people knew where to find Ethel. If they, I didn't stick her in the back with the sports, ever. Would never have happened. And I never put the police log in the front because I knew people would go to the back of the paper then to look for it. So it was a way to get the audience moving around. Well, anyway, 3 years ago in September, I retired. And it was like falling off a cliff. Because when you do something that you love a lot, and you're very, very busy all the time, and now it's over. So you wake up in the morning and go, I don't have to put a paper together. In fact, I started to lose track of the days. Like, is it Monday? Because I always knew Wednesday was this day, Thursday was Hingham production, Friday, and so I had to adjust. So I'd like to share my story today about my transition from being a newspaper editor, started out as a reporter, and I did a lot of reporting all the years I was editor, into turning myself into an author. And it was quite an interesting transition. It's not the same as news writing and editing is not the same as actually writing a book. They're very, very different. And I hope everyone here, and I'm sure you do, has a book in their soul that they're ready to write. Has anyone started? Okay, Taffy started. Here we started. It's really important. And the other thing to think about, which is something I had to learn, so this story is about my husband's youth. It's what they call a coming-of-age novel, and it runs from the age of 13 to the age of about 19, and that's it. So initially, I thought I was writing a memoir, and I wasn't. I was actually writing a novel. That was kind of a revelation to me. But it took a couple of instructors at Grub Street. Does everyone know what Grub Street is? Some of us do. Well, I did not know, even though I had been editor for all those years, never heard of it. But I found out it's a creative writing center in Boston that has tons of classes. And the people that teach the classes are often published authors. And so you go, the groups are small, and the classes are expensive. They're not cheap. You can do them online. Some of them are online even before COVID. But I was lucky because they were still doing in person. So when I started the classes, we'd never heard of COVID. So it was there that I learned that I wasn't actually writing a memoir because it wasn't about me. So the key to the memoir is if it's about you, then go ahead and do the memoir. The other thing that you have to pay attention to if you are thinking of writing a memoir is, do you have a story? The story is the key. So you may have a lot of vignettes, and they're wonderful little stories that come together. So you have to think, okay, am I going to write a memoir that would be a published book that other people would want to read? Or am I writing a memoir for my grandchildren so they can read about what fun it was to grow up and wherever you're from and what you did and the fact that you had to walk 3 miles to school barefoot like Abraham Lincoln, things like that. But everyone has interesting stories to tell. The key is if you can pull it together as a story that other people would be interested in, that's kind of the key. So when I met my husband in 1971, I had graduated from college and I was from Massachusetts. I had gone away to college. I followed my sister Lisa, who's only 13 months older than me, and she always knew exactly what she wanted to do. I had no idea, so I just followed her to the University of Miami. And I graduated, came back home, and then I went out to California where I had gotten a teaching job. And the reason was, after going to Miami for 4 years, it was, I'll wait till, oh, can you hear some water? Yep. You're getting service. Okay. I went to the University of Miami in Coral Gables, not to be mixed up with Miami University in Ohio. People always used to ask that. There's only one in Miami, really. But anyway, so you come back to Massachusetts. I grew up in Scituate, and staying in Massachusetts, the Scituate area, just seemed really like it was going to be kind of boring. I'd been away, I reinvented myself, I had a tan, I wanted to keep that going. So Los Angeles City Schools was advertising for teachers. I saw the ad in the Boston Globe, and I went in and did the interview, and they hired me on the spot. And I thought, wow, I knew there was a shortage of teachers back then, but I didn't think there was that much. But as it turned out, the reason was that in California you needed a 5-year degree. You didn't need a master's, but you needed a 5-year degree to be hired. So they were going out of state and hiring teachers with 4-year degrees because we were cheaper. So my starting pay was $7,500 a year, and I got it in 10-month increments. So it seemed like a lot of money. Back then, my car payment was $82.53. My rent was $150, so I could do it. So I met my husband Conley. I moved into a place called the South Bay Club. Again, I researched. We didn't have internet, as you all know. So I got a copy of the LA Times sent to me, and I read about the apartment complexes. And I noticed they had these complexes they were advertising called South Bay Clubs. And they were for single people only. And I thought, well, this is going to be great. It's going to be like college. It'll be like a dorm. Everyone will be single. Everyone will be young. Well, in California, single means not married. So there were lots of people there that were married 3 or 4 times. I just was single. So I had some interesting date requests. And I thought I'm not quite ready for a guy in his 50s with 9 children by 3 different women. So my husband had moved there for pretty much the same reason. He'd been transferred out from Alabama, where he was working for a company called Western Electric. Does anyone remember that company? It was part of AT&T. It was a massive company, and in the late 70s, AT&T was broken up because it was a monopoly, and Western Electric went away at that time. So he asked me out. We met at the swimming pool, and one thing led to another, and in about 7 to 9 months, we got married. And I was always fascinated from the beginning by his story, which made my story really dull in comparison. So he's one of 16 children. He's from East Tennessee, and he's number 15. And his parents are from Eastern Kentucky, Harlan County, which if you ever, I think they've done a few Hatfield and McCoy movies around Harlan, but it was a lawless place. In fact, when they were a young married couple, there were more murders in Harlan County than there were in Chicago. So it was quite a wild place. So they got married, and they were young, obviously. They got married very young back then. And they produced 7 children in Kentucky. And then one of my husband's uncles, so his father's brother, was murdered by his 2 brothers-in-law. And the reason was that Wiley was just mean. And he was mean to his wife, Laura, and she was miserable, and they had 6 children. So she kept complaining and complaining, and she tried to poison him with some poison berries. And it mixed in with his favorite dessert, blackberry cobbler, I think it was. So he got sick, but he didn't die. So he sat with a revolver next to his plate then, going forward. And then one day on his way home, he ducked through the garden gate, and Jason and Andy Souders were their names, shot him through the forehead and put Laura out of her misery. So they went to the state pen, but in Kentucky days back then, in 5 years, they were out. So Lee, who was my husband's dad, had lived with Wiley for a while, and he testified against the 2 brothers in the trial. So Jason and Andy were coming for Lee, his wife and their children. So they left in the middle of the night, went over the mountain, and ended up in East Tennessee, in Knoxville, where they had 9 more children. So it was a lot. So that was the beginning of the story. I thought, oh my God, this is really a story. So what happened was, when Conley he grew up in North Knoxville, which would have been the size of Knoxville you could compare to Quincy probably. It's not a big place. But North Knoxville was kind of cool, and they lived there in a big house, and he loved it. He was there till he was about 12 years old. And one of his older brothers, so remember, he's number 15, so he had 7 brothers. And his older brother, Bill, was I think about 12 years older, was in the Air Force. He wasn't in a war situation. He was actually a cook in the base in Puerto Rico. But he had what today we would call a nervous breakdown, and they diagnosed him with schizophrenia. So back then it was actually called dementia precox. which was at the old where the schizophrenia hadn't actually been evolved yet into that. So Bill, it was kind of a long story, but he ended up with shock treatments, and the Air Force had to station him at home, essentially. But Lee, Conley's dad, could not have a man with a mental problem in the city. It just, people didn't understand it. There was no way. They tried, and so they moved. They moved out to the country, and it wasn't that far. It was only maybe about 9-10 miles, but it might have been 1 million, because now he's in the middle of the country, and all of his friends are back in Knoxville. So Conley was going back to Knoxville to meet his friends, and he hooks up with some older guys, and they basically steal just Mercury sedans. And the reason was that in the 1952 and 53 Mercuries, there's a gap underneath the ignition where if you stick a piece of foil from chewing gum and stuff it up there, the car starts. So their key was foil from chewing gums. So they took these cars all over the place, up and down the hills. They'd run out of gas and take another one and listen to Chuck Berry on the radio and have just a great time. So that was the summer, and then Conley's in school. He's in the 8th grade, and he's in his homeroom, and the principal sends somebody down to get him to the office. So they bring him to the office, and there's 2 detectives waiting for him and saying, they had called the gang the Mercury Gang, and the Knoxville police had been hot on the trail of this situation for some time. But they tended to take cars from big parking lots, so people would come out. They didn't lock their cars. The people would come out, and where's my Mercury? It's gone. They didn't hurt any of them. They just left them and got another one. So he was arrested, taken down to the jail, and then went through. They had to take him out to Loudoun County where they had caught they found the last Mercury, where they went on a big adventure, which is all detailed. And so he went through his eldest brother, Ray, who was 22 years older than he is, had an amazing story, which is a whole nother book. But despite his very hard scrabble upbringing, he went through college and high school at the same time and ended up with a law degree. So he was a lawyer. So he took charge of the case. And Conley goes through the whole court process, and he's put on probation to his parents for a year. And if he was good, they were going to clear his record. He was only 13, so it wasn't going to be public anyway. So the story goes, he's then ready to go back to school. This is after about a 2-week gap going through all this stuff. And he's walking down the long driveway to get to the school bus. He didn't have to walk barefoot like Abraham Lincoln, but it was close. And he ends up, he gets to the bottom. His sister Annie, who was the next one in line to him, had gone ahead. And he thought to himself, I can't go to school. They're going to call me a jailbird. I'm still the new kid. I'm going to be so ashamed and embarrassed, I can't do it. So he put his thumb out, and that was the start of his long adventure. And he just kept going. He had 50 cents in his pocket. Now the kids in the Ford family all sold stuff. They all worked like dogs, whether it was the chores or just earning money to help support the family. So especially when they were in Knoxville, he sold things door to door. He knew how to talk to people. He also was tall for his age, so he looked like he was 16, not 13. But he hitchhiked all the way through Tennessee, and I detailed some of the characters he meets along the way, and he ends up, his first night in Atlanta. So he ends up sleeping at a bus station in Atlanta, and he goes into a place which is still there called the Varsity, where he eats some people had left stuff. It was kind of a cafeteria style. He eats like a half a hamburger. He takes some ketchup and he puts it in a napkin, and he just knew how to survive. So the next day he heads out and he hitchhikes all through Georgia, and he gets picked up on the Florida state line by a guy who was driving. He described the cars. My husband has an amazing memory for these details, so we have all the details about the old cars, and he had a northern accent. He was from Vermont. The plate, he had a temporary plate on the car. So he hops in with him and another man, and they let that guy out in St. Augustine, and then Conley went through Florida with this guy named Al, cashing checks at these little mom and pop stores. And it sounds awful, because He should be in jail now, but he made it all these years without being arrested for this. But what Al would do is, he was a draftsman or something, so he wrote a very clear check. And you would go in with like $9, and you would buy a few things that added up to maybe $1.50, $2, and you would get the change. But the check was bad. But the people didn't know that. Nobody checked with the banks. Conley was a Southern boy with a Southern accent, looked like a good kid. So they did this all through Florida, and they had a bunch of different adventures and close calls and things like that. And then when they get through and they go up around the Panhandle and they get to Mobile, Alabama, where he kind of reflects and Al says, it's time for us to go our separate ways. I'm getting nervous. You know, this thing isn't going to last and blah, blah, blah. So he drops him off in New Orleans. So he's still now been away from home, I think, 5 days altogether. And he sits on a bench in New Orleans and he picks up a paper and he starts looking out, he fished it out of the trash can, and he starts looking for ads for jobs. So we went to a couple, but they wanted too much information. There was one that was like a little delivery service. We rode a bicycle, but they needed an address and they needed a lot of information that he didn't have. So he kept trying, and then he saw this thing for novelty vendors. He didn't know what a vendor was, but he went, and it was a place, it's called Lucky Dog, and it's where they sell hot dogs on these kind of kiosks that they roll around the streets of New Orleans. They still have them to this day. So the first night he was there, he said, you want to work? And he said, yes. He used his brother Joe's name, but his own social security number, because he knew Joe's story. Joe was 4 or 5 years older and worked in a supermarket, so he kind of knew his story. So he went by Joe, and he was known as Little Joe on Bourbon Street. And he got a little corner, and he sold hot dogs. He was like the hot dog king for about 4 months. Rented a little apartment, and loved it. Probably would never have come home until one night a Packard came careening down Bourbon Street and knocked out his cart on purpose. So there was a turf war among the vendors. So it was kind of like a little mafia situation going on. And so when he got back to the Lucky Dog headquarters, the woman who had always had doubts about him, her name was Barbara, and she did the payroll. She said, I'm gonna give you your pay, and I'm gonna take you to your apartment, and I'm taking you to the bus station. You're gonna go home. I don't know where you're from, but I'm not comfortable. So he went and he got his little bag of money. He had a bag of money on top of his shower stall, and she took him to the bus station. And a funny little aside was that he, the first several days, he had the same clothes on the whole time. He said, boys don't care about that. It's still hard for me. I have 2 boys, and I never quite saw that part of it. But he bought this suit, and that was in one of the windows. It was black rayon with pink piping, so it looked kind of like Elvis. So it had like the pink stripes. So when he got to the bus station, he put on his pink suit or black suit with the pink piping. So when he got on the bus that was going to Knoxville via Nashville, he met up with his mom and her daughter, and the daughter thought, of course, he was a rock and roll star, and he just went along with it. Yeah. Anyway. But he ends up back home, and his dad just says, well, I hope you're going to stay. There was no love, no affection, no huge, great greeting, and he was pretty much gave his mother all of his money, and then he tried to get back and adjust back to school, but it just wasn't happening. So the second time he took off, it was to Cincinnati. He made it that far, and he went north, which he realized right away when he was picked up for vagrancy in the bus station in Cincinnati. He was just sleeping there with a newspaper in front of him, and he didn't know what that meant. But when he got to the juvenile hall, he realized this was not Knoxville. These kids were really mean and scary. So the next day, his sister drove up. The social worker found out where he was from and took him back home. And now this time, his dad had worked for the railroad all of his life. Said, well, Connie, it was called Connie as a child. It was a family name. If you're going to keep running, I want you off the street. So he gave him a train ticket that was a family pass. He said, the next time, just take the train. So sure enough, about 3 weeks later, he gets on the train and he goes to Chicago. And that's where 3 of his siblings live. And so he ends up hooking up with his sister Ethel, and he lived in a little rooming house. She didn't have room for him. And he ends up working at 2 supermarkets and working at a filling station, and you meet a lot of characters. It's just this constant train of a story that goes on. So in the interim, before he left for New Orleans, one of his jobs was what they call slopping the hogs, which is feeding the hogs in the morning. So he would have on, back then you had, even though you didn't have a lot of clothes, you had school clothes and you had your work clothes. So he was dressed for school and didn't want to get the slop on his clothes. So when he went to reach, he twisted himself and he ruptured himself. So he had a hernia that he ignored. He didn't want to tell his parents, he didn't want to tell anybody. So all of the lifting, John's over there, that really hurts, I know. All the lifting he was doing in the supermarket aggravated. So it got to the point where he couldn't even walk. So he had to tell his sister, and she and one of his brothers got a ticket and they flew him home and he had the surgery. And we go into a lot of funny stories. So anyway, he heads back to school. Finally, they hold him back a year because he basically missed a whole year of school. So he had to start with a class of 61. He ended up graduating with a class of 60. But instead of being a jailbird, nobody in Halls had ever been anywhere. So it's like he was like Moses walking down, when the Red Sea opened when he went down the hall, and they not only made him president of the class, he ended up being president of the student body. I mean, it was like he was Johnny Cash and Elvis rolled into one. He was incredibly popular, even though they were all as dirt poor as they could be. So this book takes you through high school, and he has a lot of adventures, and then when he graduates and has to get a regular job working with people that are in their 40s, and then he finally decides to head into the Air Force, where all of his brothers had served in one branch or another. But the big theme, I think, that is universal, and one of my sons, when I was working on the project, explained to me this, you have to do this theme. It's the relationship between a father and a son. So his father, like his brother Wiley, the Fords were just kind of mean, and they grew up in a rough area. So there wasn't any love, there was a lot of domineering, a lot, you do as I say. And his dad used to say, if the door goes this way and that, if you leave, just don't come back the first night. So all of them left at one point or another. He said, if you put your feet under my table, you do as I say. So that kind of comes through, and the real kind of climax to it is that neither one of them ever said they loved each other. So when his dad dies suddenly, and he's in the Air Force, and he's over in Libya, and on Wheelus, it was called Wheelus Airfield. It's no longer in existence today, but he's overcome and devastated. So it's really about missed opportunities, and connecting with people. So interestingly, the book's gotten a lot of reviews on Amazon, and some people really click into that, and they say, wow, this could be life-changing for someone who's made bad decisions in their life, and they can still make it through and turn their lives around. And one of my sons was in Dubai for 10 years, and he said in that culture, the father-son relationship is very testy. The father is the one that's going to rule the roost, and the son doesn't come home unless he's going to do what his dad says. So it's it's an interesting theme, and there's really a lesson in every chapter. So the way that I was able to accomplish this is that over the years, I knew this story. I knew more about it after Conley sat down and did a lot of tapes. When he would go over the years when I was working at the Mariner, and he'd go to Tennessee for visits, I didn't always go with him. So I would have him take a tape recorder with him in the car, and I said, just talk into the tape and try to remember everything you can about this period of your life. So when I retired, I had like 22 hours of tapes, and it was drudgery. I can see why I didn't like using a tape recorder at meetings, because it's like going through the meeting twice. But I managed to get through and pull out the memory of detail was incredible. And I know Ethel knows a lot about detail, because in her column she'll talk about things that we don't know anymore, like the way people sewed their own clothes and things like that. So that was a big help. So I did the transcriptions, and then I tried to piece it together into a story, and I joined groups that are called meetups. And if you may not know about them, but I didn't. And I was told by a friend that I had lunch with, but if you go online and you Google meetups, there's a meetup for almost everything, and they're all over the place. So there's meetups for writers, but there's meetups for stamp collectors, meetups for cooks, and it basically hooks you up with people with a similar interest. So I joined a meetup in Abington that this young man who is a published author, he was giving back. And so we would critique and we'd all turn a chapter in. And I went to another one in Braintree, and then there was a writing group in Cohasset that I joined. And the biggest challenge for me, and it came out again and again and again, was they would say, Mary, you have to leave the newswoman behind. It reads like a report. So I had to work on changing the way I was writing something so it didn't sound like nobody wants to read a 264-page news story. It just isn't going to happen. So I had to go back and enhance and create dialogue and things that I wasn't comfortable with because I was always trying to get things just accurate and not over-explaining, because in the newspapers we'll say, comma, which is this, or Situate, which is next to Marshfield, or, you know, we were always explaining so everybody could come away and say, oh, I get it. So you don't do that when you're writing. You have to trust your reader a little bit more. So it took a while between the meetups, and then I took a bunch of classes at Grub Street, and then after I would take the class, the instructors there on the side, but you do it through Grub Street, they will, and you have to pay them, they'll take your manuscript and they'll edit it, or critique it. Really critique more than editing. And I would get like 10 pages single-spaced, typed back, and I would go and make those changes. So what held me in good stead was, as I said earlier, I had been a teacher, and I only taught full-time for a year back when I met my husband, and then we got married and he was transferred through his job. We lived in Japan and France and England and Minnesota and Illinois and all these different places before we came to Massachusetts. But I had been substitute teaching whenever we were in the States, and it was very hard to get a full-time job if we weren't going to be there very long. And substitute teaching at the secondary level, for me, was always a bad experience. I mean, it wasn't horrible, I wasn't murdered or attacked, but the kids pretty much decide when they see a sub, it's time to have some fun, and let's see what we can confuse her, and blah, blah, blah. And it's funny, in Minnesota, which is so much in the news now, we lived there twice. It was a very different place back then, but because my name was Ford, they thought that was the funniest thing ever. No one is named Ford in Minnesota. They all have names like Knudsen, you know, these complicated names. So they say, Mrs. Ford drives a Chevy. And I go, oh, God. And a little funny story, I was in a homeroom and I was struggling with these names that have like two consonants together, and it was very hard to pronounce. So up came a name, a boy's name was Mike, and it was B-R-A-Z-I-E-R, which is Brazier, but I said Brazier. And the poor kid went under the desk. I'm not sure he survived the rest of the day. And it was awful because I couldn't take it back once I had actually said it. So anyway, I was substituting in Barrington High School in Illinois, and it was my last day as a sub, and I had a senior homeroom, and 3 or 4, I think there were 4 boys stood up as I was just getting ready to check everyone in, turned around, dropped their drawers, and mooned me. Oh, no. So I know. So I was like, okay, that's nothing I haven't seen before. I have 2 sons. I have a husband, but I just thought, no, I don't think people should be mooning the substitute teacher. So I had to call, they had phones in the room, and I called them, and the principals were called deans. And this is, Barrington High is where the Chicago Bears do their workouts, so it was a very big, glamorous high school. It wasn't anything, I can remember one girl arguing with her dad whether she took the Mercedes or the Porsche that morning. I mean, it made Cohasset look like it was like the poor community. I mean, it was like totally. So I said, this has happened. And they said, well, Mrs. Ford, we're sorry you're having a bad day. And I said, well, I think I'm having a bad day. I think these boys are having a bad day. I think something should happen. And they were like, blah, blah, blah. Well, nothing happened. So at the end of the day, one of them came in and apologized, and that was it. So I went home and I thought, and I want to do something else with my life. I don't want to keep substituting. I hated the call in the morning, the feeling in your stomach. You have to go someplace and you don't know anybody and it's not fun and the teacher may not leave you anything to do. And in fact, one class in Minnesota was French, and we had lived in France, and I never found the class. And they never came. And I went down and I said, and that didn't seem to bother them either. And I said, where are they? I'm in a room and no one's here all day. So anyway, I saw an ad in the paper. My neighbor was writing a little column for our local paper. We had a paper that was like the Patriot Ledger, but it had these neighbor sections. So she was writing what we would call the around town column for the neighbors. And I said, oh, that sounds like fun. So I noticed an ad in the Daily Herald. And I went down, and they were looking for correspondents. And so there were like 50 of us down there. And a lot of people fancied themselves as writers, which meant that they really weren't going to be reporters. You know, they were, oh, it's an opportunity to write. Well, it's really your opportunity to tell a story and to report. And I got that pretty quickly. So they sent us to meetings, and I went out to a meeting in Wakanda, which is a little town northwest of Chicago. And it was out all night. You know, they went into executive session. I hung in there. I remember sitting in the corridor, and they bought a fire truck. Well, that was kind of a big deal for the neighbor section. So the story went on the front page. The problem was the copy desk changed my name from Mary Ford to Betty Ford. So my first byline was actually Betty Ford. And I went to the copy desk. I said, why? Now, Betty was no longer the first lady. It wasn't that far back, but she'd the Betty Ford Center for Alcoholism or whatever was going strong. So he said, well, I just couldn't help myself. I saw Ford, and I thought Betty, and there it was. But anyway, I learned in that experience, for one thing, I walked into the newsroom, and it actually made my Hingham office look neat. Things were stacked, floor to ceiling, dust everywhere. I felt at home. I feel very comfortable in that environment for some weird reason. I don't know why. My sisters and my mother are totally great housekeepers. I did not get that gene. I always felt inferior about it. So suddenly I was with people like me that seemed to be able to find stuff and do stuff in kind of an organized chaos kind of situation. So I caught on very fast, and I learned, which helped me in good stead later, that if you're dependable and you go out and do it, they're going to use you. So they used me for everything. And I was a runner back then, believe it or not. I had run 2 marathons. Yeah, I know. I was a lot thinner back then too. But they gave me a running column. And it was funny, I used to go and try to copy, take them out of each edition of the paper, because that would run in all the editions. And there were about 12 of them. So I'd go into what we call the morgue, and I'd pull out the different editions like Palatine or Libertyville, and I cut my column out. But with dailies, they'll cut a story from the bottom. So the farther afield it goes, the shorter it gets. So in one edition, all that was there was my head. The column never made it. I think that there were 3 words. And I thought, am I going to complain about this? But anyway, I loved it. I did everything that they threw at me. So I felt so comfortable being in the news. So I found myself, I was 36 years old, and I said, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm not going to substitute teach or even try to go back to teaching. Though I did teach English as a second language in a couple of places, and that was a good experience. So that was adults. So anyway, we ended up from Illinois and Massachusetts, and the first thing I did was call the Mariner up and say, I want to start writing. And so Mike Berger was the guy who was the assistant general editor, and he said, call Judy and write in Norwell. She's always looking for people. Called her up, and she started giving me stuff. And so I worked for Judy for 4 years, covered everything, especially Hanover, because Judy's love was Norwell, so I could get away with a lot of stuff in Hanover that just kind of went right over her head. I was so into government and what they should and shouldn't be doing. I'd report on everything. I'm all worked up. I was kind of sad to leave Hanover, because I thought my first day in Cohasset, I thought this is going to be boring. And that was until I went to my first selectmen's meeting where Ned Tibbetts was the chairman, and I realized this was really going to be fun. And it wasn't because of Ned. It was because of controversy over the Board of Health seat. That what happened was the man who was sitting in the Board of Health ran for selectman and won. So that opened up a seat on the Board of Health. And then they decided they were going to appoint someone to that seat, but they weren't going to appoint the guy that actually ran for it, who was our cable guy, Bob Davenport, So I did this, I had to do my own editorials in addition to reporting for like the first 5 years in Cohasset. Terrible conflict of interest, but I did it anyway. So I wrote a blistering editorial, and I can remember it was Michael Sullivan actually who read it out loud before the board and told me I was unprofessional the next meeting. And I thought, oh my God, this is great. And I had like, I thought people would agree with me. And I went to the old Colonial Pharmacy where my pickups were, and I had 11 letters to the editor, and all of them were against me. I thought, oh my God. There's this wonderful woman, her name was Sherry Becker, I think. She had been on the Board of Health, but she didn't run, and she was moving. So why not appoint Bob? That was my argument. And guess what? They ended up appointing Bob. There was a lot of pressure on them. I think Jane Gurica had to do the deciding vote, so it was quite testy. But I thought this was going to be fun. So Cohasset was never boring from that day on. Sometimes Hingham would get a little dull, but Cohasset, no, it was always crazy. You know when these satellite trucks come to Cohasset, something big is happening, and it's going to be a national thing. So anyway, I love doing that, but I have to say I'm very proud of my book, and I can't believe I actually did it. So the key is to do it. So if you've got a book in your heart or mind, just you've got to sit down. I have the benefit of that I had to do something every single week. If someone had told me in 1992 when I first became editor, you're going to have to put out 54 papers, 26 in Hingham and 26 in Cohasset, just this year, I would have run down the street screaming. I mean, there's no way. So I had to just do it week to week and day to day. And that's really, you have to sit down, give yourself a deadline, join some classes where you have to, the great thing about the classes and the meetups are to be a good citizen of your class or meetup, you're supposed to contribute. So you're not just supposed to go and sit on a log and talk about other people's work. You're supposed to bring something and let them look at it. And then I'm lucky because I have a thick skin from all the years in journalism. Like I said, I didn't not run the police log because Reverend Edson asked me not to. I said, I'd run it every week, I don't care what you say. So I had that where it didn't bother me if people criticized in a constructive way what I was doing because I learned from it. And I definitely took it in and learned, and therefore I ended up with a pretty good book in the end. And a lot of the stuff I'm telling a man in Hingham who was interviewing me for something called Someone You Should Know. So if you get it on Hingham TV, that's me. But I told him, I said, if Conley had written the book, it would have been 3 times as long because every detail to him was really important. Oh, you have to put him in. He was my best friend in first grade. And I said, Larry doesn't turn up anywhere else, so he's going to be cut. And it was very hard. So there was a lot of stuff left on the cutting room floor, but in the end, that's what you want. You want to have your reader in mind. And you want, in my case, I want the book to succeed beyond my family. So I wasn't just writing a memoir so people could read it and go, well, I didn't know my grandfather did that. And that's a wonderful thing to do. But I wanted it to go beyond that. And so that's what I did. So in February, it came out. And what I did was, a lot of people don't realize this. So the publishing industry has changed hugely. And I know this just from being an editor all those years. People would walk up the stairs with their books. And it used to be that self-publishing was like almost a stigma. Well, you couldn't get it published, and it felt published, and it must be pretty bad. That's not the case today. I mean, you have the gatekeepers with the big publishing companies. They're interested in Stephen King. They're interested in Bob Parker. They're the ones that are making them the money. And they take a few new authors and they might get lucky, but they're not. I know 2 people through all of my meetups in Grove Streets that went there, they got the agents and they've been published, and my book is doing 10 times better. I have more reviews. I'm in Buttonwood in different places that they can't get into. I mean, one of my friends, she can't even write a press release. It all has to go through Penguin Books. And they're not going to, they did this. First, they weren't even going to do a print version. They decided things were bad, so they're just going to do ebooks. So you lose your control. So last November, I was just on Facebook, and this Facebook thing came up, this book, a company called Paper Raven Books. And what it does is it's a self-publishing company that assists you. So there's many ways to do it. You can self-publish tomorrow by just going on Amazon and putting a book up. And you can pick a cover and you've got a book and it's published. But it's going to be among something like 400,000 other books that are being published at the same time or the same year. So the thing with Paper Raven that attracted me, so they advertised this boot camp, and it was 3 days long, and it was all virtual, so it was on Zoom, and there were about 60 or 70 people, and it was only $100 for 3 days, so it was 8 hours, and 6 hours. So I took it, and I was really impressed. The president of the company used to be working with one of the big 5 publishers. You know, she shows a desk with a big stack of unsolicited manuscripts that are just not going to be looked at and gone through. So they have you can get them online at paperraven.com, but they have different levels. And because I'm already an editor, and my book was edited so many times by me and then by different critiques and all this other stuff, I was pretty comfortable that I didn't have to go through that process. So I could get in at the lowest level, because basically they were going to proofread it, and then they were going to design the inside. And one thing that's really fun is they do a cover design contest. So this is the cover, and what you do is you send a little blurb about the book, and they send it out. It's a company in Australia, and I had over 200 submissions from graphic designers all over the world to pick from. So you narrow it down to like 10 and then 5, and then you get this like tremendous cover. This guy just got it. And my husband had a lot of input. Like, he was on the wrong side of the road initially, and the wrong hand was out. And I said, no one will notice. He said, yes, they will. So he knew how to hitchhike. So that was a good thing. And the other thing that they're really good at, that I would have no idea how to do, is how to launch it. And so they understand the metadata and the algorithms. So when you actually launch, they give you a lot of stuff you have to do on your own social media, like Facebook, and I don't do Twitter, and I don't do Instagram, so I mean Facebook and LinkedIn, and getting a certain number of people that will be on your team that would agree to review your book. So you send them a pre-copy. So what you don't want to do is launch and have no reviews. So you want to have maybe 20 reviews right away. So you've got to find people that will do that for you. Not everyone, a lot of people say, oh, I'll do it, and then they don't. You know, very typical. So I'm glad I had a little push there. And so, and then they launch it, and they guarantee that you're going to be ranked #1 in at least one category during the launch period. So we were ranked #1 in 3, like teen and young adult biographical fiction. There were some kind of categories I'd never heard of before. But they create a lot of buzz. And the first week, the ebook is free. So that gets a lot of people to go. So that got it started. And from that point on, I've been having a lot of fun just trying to learn about marketing myself and how to get it out. I've been a big hit locally, even if I wanted to say on TV. I've been on a lot of shows, Zooms, and I've done book signings. And in Knoxville, there was this nice man who went to Halls High School, who's quite a bit younger than my husband, but he has all the email addresses of anyone that ever went to Halls High School. So he did a big, massive thing for me. So we have on this one website, I can pull up these little lights, and around Knoxville and around, Massachusetts, the little book is lit up, but the country's a big place. I need it to light up in other sections. So my challenge now is to get it out beyond the local. And I'm having fun doing it. It's been great. And my husband, it's been wonderful for him. And we have been, it's been a team project. But I made sure my name was on the cover, because I said, I'm writing this thing. Believe me, he would love to say by Conley for it, but it would be a very different book. But, and he's only got 3 siblings that are still alive. And so, because it's 16, he's 79, Conley is. So think about it. They're up there. And as we all are. But they've been pretty supportive. One of his sisters, only surviving sister, is too emotional. She can't even open it. It's just, so a lot of them have detail, they all had the same dad. They all grew up in the rough, hard scrabble life. And so for some of them it's been hard, but it's Conley's story and it's his perspective. He talks about his siblings, but it doesn't really have a lot of of stuff about their lives, other than how, when, and when they interacted with his. So anyway, I'll open it for questions if anybody has any. I mean, I can talk, as you can tell.
Yes, didn't mention his mother that much.
Yeah, no, she's in there. Now remember, she was busy.
Right.
Yeah. She's in there, and she was about 200 pounds, very squarely built, and very soft-spoken, nice woman. And it's funny, she told me when I had my second child, she said, honey, she said, I think I'd stop. And I said, well, coming from her, I guess I'll take that advice. But it was very hard on the sisters, like his sister Ethel, who's featured in the book. All of the siblings just remember Ethel standing at the stove with a baby on one hip and a wooden spoon in the other, because she was taking care of all these babies, and her mother was, you know, her mother just did everything. She would never stand up to him. She did everything for him. She was devoted and dedicated, which was very typical of where she was from and that era. And she lived to 89, I think. I think she died in like around 1991. And I think we got it right. She was born in 1900, so math is not my strong suit. So, but she's definitely in there. Yeah. But it was definitely the story more about the dad and the son conflict. Yeah, that relationship was there for sure. Yes.
So what happened after he was 19?
Well, he went into the Air Force, and then,
There was another book.
yeah, well, a lot of people have asked me that, and they've also said, one of my instructors at Grove Street said, hey, I tore right through it, and he said, but I'm really curious, he said, what kind of husband and father was he? And I thought, oh, that's a whole nother book, but I don't know if I want to share that. But he said he wasn't a very introspective person, that's what he could gather. And I thought about that and thought, you know what, he was too busy just trying to survive and put one foot in front of the other. So you didn't sort of sit down, you didn't feel sorry for yourself. In fact, it took him, it was a long time before he realized other families weren't the same as his, that people were actually affectionate and said they loved each other. Yeah, so it was very different. But when he was in the Air Force, he thought, you know, if I can get promoted in the Air Force, I can get promoted with a company. So when he left in 1964, I got out of the Air Force, he stayed in the reserves and the National Guard for like another 4 or 5 years, but he went and he found the biggest company he could, which was Western Electric. And he started in the mailroom. But he was such a good worker, and he's a very gregarious, charming kind of person. So that's why people bought hot dogs from him. I mean, there are people they wouldn't buy a hot dog from, but they'd buy one from him. And so he worked his way up, and he did do it. One chapter talks about him wanting to go to the University of Tennessee, and it just wasn't going to happen. But he did end up graduating in Boston from Wentworth.
Wow.
He went to Saturday school, and he got his engineering degree after working with engineers for many, many years, but always having that I don't have my degree kind of thing.
Is that in there?
It's in there, yeah. It's in the epilogue.
If I got it for my grandson, the first I'm going to take off. That sounds like an adventure.
Well, it's an adventure, and he says in the epilogue, don't do what I did. It's a very different world.
It was a very different.
Yeah.
Perseverance.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and the other thing is they smoked. There's tons of cigarettes in the book.
Yeah.
In fact, when he was a senior, he had to give a talk, I think it was a senior, and he talked about how to field strip a cigarette so there wouldn't be so much pollution, litter. So he tore a cigarette apart and smushed it onto the stage floor, and that was allowed. I thought that was kind of a cool. I mean, they had smoking areas for kids, it was different. And then the cars, everyone had their car, and you were what they call a shade tree mechanic. You did all of the work yourself, and they did drag racing and.
Colleges and smoking areas.
Oh yeah, it was all. I mean, it wasn't until I think I was in college when the Surgeon General came out, and that would have been like 1966, with a big thing where suddenly the cigarette packets had this could be bad for you. But before then, any old movie you see, oh my God. It was all part of the romance. I mean, people would blow smoke in your eyes, and But anyway, I'm proud of it. It's been a long journey, and I still can't believe I'm 72 years old. So You can do it. And everybody should write a book.